Good morning. I'm Harley Schlanger from the LaRouche Organization with your daily update for April 7th, 2021. Yesterday, we went through a review of the war danger coming from the Biden administration's adoption of the British imperial geopolitical approach to Russia and China, which is to carry out provocations on behalf of regime change, which could and very likely will lead to war if they're not stopped. This was pursued initially under Obama. It goes back to the Bush-Obama policies, and it's an extremely dangerous one. But with Biden, you have the same team as you had with Obama, and they've learned nothing from the past. Now, one aspect of this is that we're engaged in a new arms race. This was something that Donald Trump tried to head off in his July 2018 meeting with Putin in Helsinki, where they talked about reducing nuclear weapons production, development, and instead of this becoming a theme for U.S.-Russian relations, it was hijacked by the military-industrial complex and the media, which turned the Helsinki encounter into Trump's submission to Putin. But what Trump said at the time was that he believed that Putin did not intervene in the 2016 election more than those U.S. intelligence agencies which said that the Russians did. And it turns out, after all the material has been released, and not all of it is released, but after what was released, showed that Putin told the truth, Trump believed the truth, and it was the media and the Obama intelligence team, the MI6 operation from Britain, that was lying. Now, as a result of the failure to engage in serious arms negotiations, what we're seeing is a new arms race. And one aspect of that arms race was the announcement yesterday of the failure of a new hypersonic missile. It was a test that was going to be launched from a B-52 bomber of the rapid response weapon, but it could not be completed. And it was described as a setback by the Defense Department and by Lockheed Martin. Now, this is part of an attempt to compete with Russia and China, who have made great progress with hypersonic weapons, that is, weapons that can go up to 5 times faster than the speed of sound. An arms race with these weapon systems will be extremely costly. Lockheed Martin has received more than $3 billion in the last year on the hypersonic orders, and they expect another $1.5 billion this year. So what you have is an administration that's pumping out more and more disinformation about the Russian and Chinese aggressive intention, their malign intent, and carrying out more provocations for what purpose? To justify ever larger defense budgets. For purposes of what? If you get into a war with these weapons, what will be left? And instead of negotiations, we have provocation after provocation. Now, at the same time this is going on, we're just getting bombarded with big lies about the economy. And I'm going to go through a couple of these today because this is what you're hearing from the media. In the same way that Obama's stock market bubble was described as economic growth, and the same way Donald Trump grabbed onto the stock market bubble as a sign that his economic policies were working, we see the Biden administration and international agencies such as the International Monetary Fund doing the same thing. That is, that there's money being pumped into bubbles. And as these bubbles grow, they're being described as economic growth. So as the cancer that undercuts the real economy is growing, we're being told this is good. And don't worry, eventually it will catch up with the productive side and the consumer side. All we're seeing is a growth of unsustainable debt, which is already beyond limits. Now, here's the report that I'm referring to on the lies about the economy. The International Monetary Fund is going into its spring meeting, and what they're saying is U.S. GDP is set to grow at 6.4% this year. What does that mean? It means the bubble is growing. But this is a growth from lows that were hit during the COVID crisis. And what they're saying is the U.S. GDP growth will be the engine for the entire world. Now, the reality is that what we're about to have is inflation and then a regime of high interest rates to control the inflation. So the era of easy money, which is feeding this bubble, which is continuing, and which Jerome Powell says will continue into 2023. We'll see what happens if inflation goes up. But this is expected to continue to feed the bubble. But what's the real result of this? There's a flow of capital out of developing sector countries, such as Brazil and India, into the US bubble. So it makes the US bubble bigger. But the reality is the dollar is extremely weak, and the physical economy of the United States is not growing, but the cancer is growing. A side effect of this, and a very important side effect, is the increase in wealth concentration, or the disparity between rich and poor. The wealth concentration is going into the hands of the few. And these are the ones who are pushing the Great Reset to make this trend permanent. Now, the IMF report has a couple of other aspects to it that are not given as much publicity. One, the average income in the developing sector is down 20%. That's a significant drop. But in the advanced sector, including the United States, average income is down 11% going into 2021. In the US, 10 million people fell into the poverty level in 2020, and they're expecting another 5 million more in 2021. And those who are dropping into poverty are seeing a huge increase in debt, especially credit card debt. We can expect a wave of foreclosures and probably as well evictions from apartments. Now, this is a booming economy. This is the engine of the world. This is going to be made worse with the Great Reset and the Green New Deal. Now, importantly, there's positive news on this front. What I've been reporting, what the LaRouche organization has been reporting, is that there's tremendous opposition to the Great Reset, which is a fraud designed to carry out to establish a central banker's global dictatorship, acting on behalf of private banks and private corporations who are the ones running up the debt to sustain the impression that what they're carrying on their balance sheet is actually worth something, when increasingly corporate debt is hitting the level of junk bond debt, and banks are experiencing losses left and right, with Credit Suisse, JP Morgan Chase, the various kinds of stock bubbles and equity bubbles and derivative bubbles are crashing. So we're seeing a collapse. And this is not a healthy economy, and many people recognize it. So we pointed out that there will be a rejection by people in the United States, probably by some corporations, but also globally. Now here's the latest, and this is kind of humorous. John Kerry, who's the climate czar for Biden, went to India to lecture the Indians on the need to escalate their drive toward net zero, that is, no carbon emissions. So he ran into the energy minister of India, Raj Kumar Singh, who on March 31st had the following statement. He said this to Kerry and to a climate summit. You have 800 million people who don't have access to electricity. You can't say they have to go to net zero. They have the right to develop. They want fossil fuels for power, and they must use them. And India is also, along with China and Russia and many countries in Africa, pursuing nuclear power as an option. Now, as for the U.S., the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission issued a somewhat damning report that the percent of U.S., I assume, electric power companies suffering blackouts jumped from 20% to 44% in 2020. 44% of the power generating plants had blackouts in 2020. And the FERC, the Energy Regulatory Commission, said this is due to increasing the share of renewables, that is wind and solar, in the electricity production mix. So let's just sum up what we have on the economy. You have more money going to the military industrial complex for war, and belligerent comments being made to provoke the buildup, to justify the buildup. Secondly, a growing number of poor. Third, a growing debt. Fourth, a growing danger of inflation and high interest rates. And five, unreliable and efficient energy production. That's a boom. That's the kind of boom you have from a crash. And we're supposed to believe that America is back. Now, tomorrow I'll go through the LaRouche program, which actually would bring America back by combining bankruptcy reorganization with American system Hamiltonian credit policies and investment in infrastructure. Not Biden's green infrastructure, which is a waste of money. It's a net detraction from the real economy, but a real economic boom that would come from carrying out LaRouche's economic policies. So I'll see you again tomorrow. Thanks for joining me, and share this and get other people to come to the LaRouche organization for news. It's the one place you'll find the real story that's not controlled by social media and the mainstream media. So thanks for joining me, and see you tomorrow.